Got it. So with that, good morning. I'm going to call the meeting to order. And I'm Jennifer March, the IBO board chair. And I think it says on our agenda, we're going to do a very quick round of introductions. So I'm going to toss it to Louisa, and then we can each name a person as we go through our Zoom box. Louisa?
Good morning, everybody. We have the full IBO staff here, so this is going to be lightning speed. I'm going to hand it to Tara. Tara, you're muted.
Hi, I'm Tara Swanson. I'm the Senior Production Coordinator here at IBO. Next on my screen is Mark Page.
So I'm an IBO board member.
Jackie?
Hi, I'm Jackie Sherman. I'm the General Counsel at IBO, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Stefanski.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Stefanski, and I'm a Senior Research and Strategy Officer here at IBO, covering housing and economics and infrastructure.
Hand it on, Sarah.
I'm going to pass it on to Rochelle.
Rochelle Rainoff, Communications Advisor. And next is Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Neary. I'm the first Deputy Director at IBO. And I'll pass it on.
Jacob.
You're fading in and out, Lisa.
Let's pass it to Jacob.
All right, great. I'm Jacob Berman. I'm the Assistant Director for Social and Community Services. Marla. Is muted. And can't unmute.
Okay, that's Marla Simpson. She's the Special Advisor to the Director. Jacob, Michael.
I'm Michael Jacobs, Assistant Director for Economics and Taxes at IBO, and I'll pass it on to Juliana.
Hi, I'm Juliana Golbieski. I'm a senior economist at IBO, and I'll pass it to Sarita.
And I'm Senior Research and Strategy Officer at IBO. I cover education and social and community services. I'll pass it to Elena.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elena. I am the Economic Development, Budget, and Policy Analyst at IBO, and I'll pass to Arden.
Thanks, Elena. I'm Arden Armbruster. I'm the analyst for arts and culture and criminal legal agencies at IBO, and I will pass it to Robert.
Good morning, everyone. Robert Maraglia, General Counsel to the Bronx Borough President and NYCERS Trustee.
Wayne Ho.
Wayne Ho, I run the Chinese American Planning Council, and I'm a board member. I will pass it to Jordan.
Thanks, Barbara. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jordan Page, and I am the Environmental Budget and Policy Analyst at the IBO. I'll pass it over to Harry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Mosier. I'm a lead economist at IBO, and I'll pass it to Tina.
Hi, everyone. I'm a Senior Education Policy Analyst here at IBO, and I'll pass it to Brian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian. I'm the Budget Review Analyst at IBO, and I also cover labor policy. And I will pass to Cole.
Hi, I'm Cole Rako. I'm also a Senior Economist here at IBO, and I will pass it to Joydeep.
Good morning. I'm an economist at large at IBO, mostly working on the education team, and I will pass it on to Young Won.
Good morning. My name is Young-Wan Song, and I'm an education budget and policy analyst at IBO. And who do I have to pass? Somebody.
Sure.
Okay.
Should we do Professor Hamilton?
Hi, everyone. I'm Derek Hamilton. I'm a professor of economics and policy at the New School and the director of the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy. a board member. Glad to be here. Feel free to call me Derek, and I'll pass it to Jackie Sherman.
Thank you. I'm Jackie Sherman. I'm from IBO, and I will pass it on to Brian Kane.
I've actually gone, but I'll pass to Claire.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. I'm Claire Slant. I am the Budget and Policy Analyst for Social Services, and I will pass it to Cassandra.
Hi, everyone. I am Cassandra. I'm the Budget and Policy Analyst covering all things health related, and I'm not sure who to pass it to because it seems like a lot of people. I think Jordan went already.
I'm gone. I don't think Emma's gone.
Hi, I'm Emma Gossett. I just started. I'm an Education Budget and Policy Analyst, and I will pass it to Elizabeth. I don't think is gone.
I actually think there are a couple of board members also that haven't introduced themselves yet after Elizabeth Guzman introduces herself.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Guzman. I'm trying to get my video going. I'm the General Counsel for the Office of the Public Advocate, Jumani Williams. And let's see. I don't know who to pass it on to, so.
Melanie?
Melanie?
Allison?
Hey, everybody. Mel Hartzog, CEO of the Foundling, board member, and mother of 3 who can't get it together for the start of school. So I'm in transit. I'll be in the Office of Visual shortly.
Thanks, Mel. Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Uktum. I'm a board member, and also I'm a professor of economics at City University of New York, and former executive officer and former associate dean. I don't know who didn't pass yet.
Paquita?
Hi, I'm Paquita Davis Friday, a professor of accountancy at the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College and the former interim dean and a board member.
Jonathan Rosenberg. Represents the City Council and is an IBO alum and is not yet quite with us due to technology. Did we miss anyone? Well, that's an achievement.
Actually, we do. I think Richard, have you gone from our?
Yeah,
our
2
end?
new economists we have.
Oh,
Richard?
I'm Richard DeSalvo. I'm IBO's an IBO economist. I study the property tax.
And Ben? Ben Ferry is our latest economist that just started this week and maybe a little camera shy at this point.
Yeah, I think his audio has an issue. He's next to me, and
Oh, okay. Well, we're very happy he's with us.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. So I'm going to start with a first order of business, which is to approve the minutes of the June 14th, 2023 meeting. So I'd like to ask for a motion from the board.
I'll move.
Thanks, Wayne. And a second? And all in favor?
Right.
Great.
Aye.
So I'm just going to give a brief update before turning the Zoom over to IBO Director Louisa Chafee. First, we want to extend our appreciation again to the Public Advocate, Jumani Williams, and Brad Lander, the Controller, for their approval of our new advisory board members. You've met Melanie Hartzog this morning, Derek Hamilton, Paquita Davis Friday. Other new members include Henry Garrido and Dean Foulahan. So we're really thrilled to have a full board. This, in fact, is the 3rd IBO meeting with Louisa as new director, and it's the 2nd meeting with a full advisory board present, which we're thrilled about. And then I just want to flag that many of you are likely paying attention to the dire warnings coming out of the city administration about the status of New York City's budget. There has been a PEG letter released on the 9th of September that articulates the need for 3 rounds at 5% reductions. I just want to let you know that the IBO is looking very closely at the implications of the PEG letter. And I would remind you that there had been earlier analysis of the costs related to new arriving migrants. So please be confident that the IBO is going to keep us apprised of any analysis that emerges from their monitoring. And with that, Louisa, I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Jen. Good morning, everybody. So the first thing I'd like to do is to thank the advisory board for helping IBO in issuing 12 publications this summer, which is 6 more than we did last summer, and has moved a lot of publications that were in the pipeline along. So we're really excited, and we have a couple of those to talk about today. I wanted to talk about the internal work at IBO. For the last basically 5 months, we've been doing strategic planning, and we are all hands on deck. Everyone's on a team, and we are focused on increasing engagement with more stakeholders and improving our work product issuance process. So we're looking forward to speaking to you about it publicly, as well as having a new website and various other demonstrations of increased outreach. But we're, more changes are coming, so that's exciting internally. Good morning, Henry.
Morning.
Externally, I think the largest thing that we just wanted to flag is what Jen said, namely, we are paying really close attention to the PEG letter that was issued, which includes obviously the reductions as well as OTPS and PS freezes. Also, I want to flag that every year IBO issues a publication called Budget Options, which are basically ideas to save money and increase efficiencies. We did not organize this, but we are grateful to Errol Lewis for having written an article yesterday in New York Magazine, where he refers to us, I think, as oft ignored, but high value or something like that. The point being that we have a whole series of budget options from the past, and we are working on rounds for this year and thinking about specifically how to help our government peers think through these ongoing cuts. We'll also put in the chat where the past years are if you're interested in seeing the past years. And that's really my internal report. I think, I want to flag, we have new hires. So a couple people identified themselves as new hires. We also, in the past few months, have hired internally Sarita and Sarah as joint research directors, senior research and strategy officers. We're sort of close to having our org chart fully in place, which is exciting to move productivity up. And I think Henry has a question and a beautiful background, if I may say so.
Thank you. I have a question about this PEG letter. As much as I read it, it refers to an additional $1 billion that the governor has committed. And there was question whether in fact that meant a billion on top of the already billion that the state had given in order to offset some of the cost of the migrants. And it's my understanding that there's an additional amount of money that the city is owed or has that money due from the state. And this is specifically talking to the governor's people, that was not accounted for in our budget, in our update when the mayor put that out. And it's significant. And I'm wondering if we looked at that. That's my first question. And second, on the 5% each, particular date, the 5, 5, and 5, with the freeze, The question was whether that was in the adopted budget or whether that's in the current piece. Because remember, we had an ongoing PEG to begin with. And so agencies had already submitted a PEG. So that's it. On top of that, then it's not 15%, it's actually going to be more.
Right. Any additional monies from the governor are not in the adopted budget. And so that's part of the analysis, is trying to understand exactly what has been spent for the asylum seekers and what is in the process of reimbursement. And once we have that information, we'll share it with you and publicly. So that's the first part of your question. I think the second part is this PEG new, or is it in effect a continuation of what was in the budget documents? And it's our understanding that this is a new PEG. Sorry to make your day.
Yeah, well, we have 20,000 vacancies as of yesterday. And that's just on the city agencies. It is lower than what it was, but it's still quite significant. You add another 15% reduction to that. I simply, and I just got to say this, I simply don't know how the agencies are going to be able to function. So that's all I'm going to say.
I think Jen had a comment.
Yeah, I know you probably don't want to dwell on this at a moment because you're trying to actually get the analysis together, but I wondered, when you look at relief or cost savings, if there's any capacity to look at if certain key positions and staffing in city agencies were actually filled so that New Yorkers could access the things that they are actually seeking and entitled to. What costs could be defrayed, prevented, and also what kind of economic multiplier might we see? Because we're hearing on our end, no one's getting food stamps renewals, we're not getting cash assistance, people are in shelter more than 2 years. Like, there's a lot of operational issues that need to be worked through, and the lack of staff is really impeding access to basic things that could really ultimately ensure we're spending wisely rather than on more crisis-oriented things.
Just to clarify though, is the hiring freeze on federally funded heads? So Jen, when you say that, right, cash assistance has a MO, but right, SNAP does not. So are they freezing federally funded positions or grant funded, or is it just city funded?
No, but Henry might be able to speak to this better. The problem is that the vacancies are across positions and agencies, and they're—
No, I get that. I'm just saying, if they're not freezing those positions, those are just hard to fill because they're hard to fill.
Maybe, but I don't know that there's any effort to fill them, which is my concern.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're freezing those too, even if they're prorated or paid 100% by the feds or reimbursed 100%. Because they're reimbursed, they're freezing them as well. At least that's the message the agencies got on Saturday.
I think we have Wayne and Francesco.
Thanks. Yes, everything that Jen and Henry and Mel have raised. I think in addition to the impacts to just New Yorkers trying to access services, it's also about contracted providers like nonprofit organizations and social services organizations are going to be impacted. That's everything from right now, for example, I'm owed millions of dollars because there's not staffing at certain city agencies to process the payments or to approve and authorize units of service, et cetera, et cetera. There's also impacts when we usually have opportunities to negotiate when our landlords increase our rent or there's other costs that go up. There's sometimes opportunities for us to renegotiate our contract so we can cover increased costs, especially during a time of higher inflation. And I think these pegs are worrying everyone, not just in terms of city employees, but also in terms of city services as well as contracted services.
Thank you, Wayne. Francesco?
Well, the letter says that there is a full hiring freeze on city, interfund agreement, intra-city, and water authority funded position. So there's no mention of federally funded. And there are exceptions for health, public safety, and revenue generation. So that's what we know.
Thanks, FB.
I mean, how does one get a slot to speak?
You have it now, Mark.
Okay, sorry. I mean, it seems that missing from the letter is a regard for actually running the place. And one would think that that would be the primary focus, and that the questions of freezes would be secondary to that, and would focus, among other things, on what actually enables you to balance or not in city funds and get the job done, which presumably would mean a renewed focus on spending other people's money to the extent it's available to us. And that just seems to be missing.
Yes. Are there, does anyone else, would anyone else like to add to this part? I cannot tell you our exact time frame, but we are focused on trying to quickly move answers publicly. Some of this also has to do with data coming in from the city, because we don't have all the data we need to be able to answer every question, and trying to figure out how to get out what's appropriate quickly. But we are focused on this.
Thank you.
If this part is, sorry, we have both Henry and Derek, or Derek and Henry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this phase, one of the modes is rhetorical. That seems clearly. So, you know, as a group, maybe a suggestion is, where might we want to begin drawing lines in the sands, at least rhetorically, of where not to cut in terminology. Like, we could argue investments in people in place in New York are untouchable. And if so that those aren't even areas, try to at least win the war of words of what can be topics of discussion. Whether we win or not, we're at least getting our rhetoric, getting the rhetoric out.
Thank you. And Henry?
Yeah, I guess my question is this: there seems to be a debate whether, in fact, the city's numbers about how much we spent is overly exaggerated by OMB, particularly what has been spent on consultants at the beginning of the process, who gave advice and are no longer doing that. So McKinsey's of the world. So I would really like to see that. I know you're probably looking at this, not that we just say, here's what we spent, but there are parts of this spent that are no longer, they're not recurring. Because this idea that we spent 1.7 billion and it's going to be $3 billion, for the next, 3 years, and here's how we're coming up with that, seems to be highly exaggerated. And at least it makes it really hard to fight the federal government. I'm in DC having the same discussion to try to push the feds to get more money to the city. And I'm getting hit with the city's overly exaggerating these projections. And I think the IBO has been the counterbalance to that, and probably would be this time around more than any time. Consider an honest broker. And there's a lot of things that are being pushed back, for instance, on the cost of housing, right? The cost of what the federal government considers to be an acceptable amount, you know, $150 a night, whereas the city is calculating at 400 and change. When a lot of those migrants are being moved out of the city, you know, for us, it's not inconceivable that a night will cost $400, right? But for the feds, it's considered to be an exaggeration. So I would really like to see whatever the report is to be like as honest as possible. Say, here's what we spent, here's what we're gonna do, here's what we estimate real spent is gonna be, and you know, because that's what's being pushed right here, and it's a problem for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. We do have a fundamental challenge in that much of the city's procurement process is going through Health and Hospitals Corporation, which is not an organization that gives data to IBO, and most of the work is going through emergency contracts, which aren't yet necessarily registered. So seeing exactly what is going on is really complicated, but we are trying and making additional data requests so as to try and understand how the numbers that the city is speaking to correlate with expenditures that we can see have occurred.
Lisa, are you planning as part of your series of looking at efficiencies to do something on overtime, particularly for PD?
We are definitely looking at overtime across the uniformed agencies.
Whoever's working on it, I'd love to have a conversation offline about it, particularly about PD, having spent an enormous amount of time trying to tackle that issue.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay. I apologize because I omitted one topic from my report before I hand it over to the next part, and that is that Dean regretted that he couldn't be here, but I spoke to him yesterday, and he had the suggestion that there might be a subcommittee of the advisory board that would meet more frequently than every quarter, maybe once a month, specifically around this issue of budget reductions and the way the city is proceeding through this as we gather information for your assistance and guidance. And so we'll be reaching out about that directly after that to see who else might be interested. What we think we might do is just schedule it, and then people could join as it works. But we very much appreciate your knowledge and your insight, and recognize that this is exactly the type of situation that IBO was designed for, and are thinking of the various ways that we should meet, you know, our mandate. So stay tuned on that. Okay.
That's a great idea.
Thanks. It's not mine. It was Dean's. And he said I could give him credit. But I think particularly now, you know, this is, we very much appreciate hearing from you and the different thinking about how to perform our analysis and also move our public speaking forward. Also on the agenda today are a series of report outs on reports that we've done this summer, which are perhaps less grave, but if it's okay, we'd like to pivot to that and proceed. Okay. So the first one we have is Arden reporting on what New York City is spending on arts and culture and the unusual way in which the majority of the spend happens. Arden?
Thanks, Elisa. And yes, definitely going to take a bit of a U-turn to something a little lighter. This is a project that we published yesterday, so it's really hot off the presses and excited to share it with you. Specifically, this project is on payments made by the city to cultural nonprofits. When I say cultural nonprofits, I mean the visual arts, performing arts, literary arts, but also film and media and arts education, that whole gamut. So for a little bit of background, in the last year at IBO, we've received several requests about the city's total investment in arts and culture, which is a complicated question to answer. So we have been talking internally about how to break that request into more manageable research projects that we can sort of roll out over the course of the year. And one area that IBO has unique insight is city spending by agencies other than the Department of Cultural Affairs and the city libraries, which aren't technically agencies, but I'll refer to them that way for the sake of ease. And from talking with the cultural sector, sort of listening to arts advocates, this is also an area that is of great interest to them. So the focus of this project was, as I said, on payments to cultural nonprofits, and we're sort of comparing those payments as they're made by DCLA and the library subsidies to payments made by other city agencies. So DCLA and the libraries operate primarily through grants and subsidies, whereas other city agencies, as many of you well know, are sort of purchasing goods and services through the procurement process. And I do want to recognize that this isn't the only means through which city dollars flow to the cultural sector, but it's the start of more engagement by IBO on this issue. So if you have ideas for future projects on the topic, we'd love to discuss them with you. So I'm going to turn now to our top level findings. We identified a total of $727 million in payments made across all city agencies to cultural nonprofits in fiscal year 22. We chose 22 because it was the most recently closed fiscal year when this project began. And that includes $425 million in library subsidies. So that's the 3 public library systems, $212 million in payments by the Department of Cultural Affairs, and then $89 million in payments by other city agencies. And that might not seem like a lot, but I want to take a step back and put it in the context of DCLA's budget. So DCLA has 2 major programs. The majority of their budget goes to subsidies sort of in perpetuity to a select group of institutions known as the Cultural Institutions Group. And again, that is the majority of their budget. Their other major program is the Cultural Development Fund, which is a competitive grant. And in 2022, they awarded $50 million through that grant. So $50 million compared to this nearly $90 million is a significant chunk of change for the cultural sector. The agencies that we found, other than DCLA and the libraries, with the greatest total payments were the Department of Education with $27 million, DYCD with $21 million, and then Parks and Recreation with $19 million. Not a huge surprise, all of those agencies have a pretty sizable cultural footprint. And then in the report and supporting materials, we also did a breakdown by sort of cultural sub-industry and a breakdown of the funding by the borough of the nonprofit administrative address. And like Louisa was saying, this isn't well known for sort of good reason. The city does not track this spending specifically, so we did have to come up with a sort of novel methodology to identify these payments. And what I did was I used public nonprofit data from the IRS. I limited that to cultural nonprofits using a federal industry classification code that's included in that nonprofit data. The data is based on Form 990s. And then we matched that list of sort of New York City-based cultural nonprofits to every payment made by the city in 2022, which, yes, took quite a long time to download from the city system. And that's how we landed with our findings. And I've been saying project quite a lot and not report too much, because in addition to a full report with that methodology, we also released the aggregated underlying data and a 1-page infographic trying to keep sort of our audience, which is cultural nonprofits, in mind. And we have an outreach plan to arts advocacy groups to present our findings and demonstrate how to use the underlying data. And that's to answer more granular questions that they have, but it's also sort of a longer term strategy to better connect them to city government and to identify ourselves as a resource on this topic where we haven't done as much work in the past. So that's all for me. Happy to take questions if anyone has them.
think
Shay.
Wayne and Henry have questions.
Thanks for doing the report. I just looked through it quickly. Just quick question. Did you get a chance to look at the specific arts and cultural organizations that receive funding? And what I mean by that is, I know amongst the more neighborhood-based or ethnic or race-based cultural and arts institutions, there's always a feeling that city funding goes to the culture institutions group and not to them. So Museum of Chinese Americas, El Museo, and others always talk about equity within city funding. And I didn't know there was a permanent lines going over to the cultural institutions group. So I'm wondering if you took a look at more of the equity issue within the funding, given what you've already said about challenges in getting the data.
Sure. I think it's a question that we've heard a lot, and I think everything you're saying is very familiar from what we've been hearing from this sector. Unfortunately, the data doesn't really allow that analysis in a consistent way. You know, the 990 data doesn't really indicate, you know, who nonprofits are serving. We could, you know, you might be able to do that based on where the nonprofit is located, but a lot of these organizations are doing programming throughout the city, and where that's happening isn't well captured. So I think that there are sort of challenges with both existing city data and sort of federal data that these nonprofits are required to produce, that makes doing those analyses really challenging. But I will say, to the point of the cultural institutions group, I think that that's right, that it isn't very well known. And that was in 2022, $160 million of DCLA's budget. And that is, those subsidies are in perpetuity. So to grow any funding for other institutions essentially would mean having to grow DCLA's budget.
Henry?
Yeah, the question is related to the payment to CIRS to the pension, which is not done specifically to the cultural institutions, but on behalf of them. As you know, they're part of it, and they mingle with the daycare and other after-school program. Was the report inclusive of that amount paid by the city directly to the pensions, to the CIRS specific?
No, so this was just payments directly to those cultural institutions, but that's a great thing for us to know and to think about for future reports, as we're looking at sort of, you know, how do we break this question into smaller pieces, and maybe that's a sort of report in itself. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you for the report.
Okay, the next report is titled Projecting the Growth of Legal Cannabis Market in New York City, with joint authorship by Elena and Eric.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Elena. I am the Economic Development Budget and Policy Analyst at IBO, and I'm going to be talking today with Eric as well, who's on the call, and he is a lead economist here. We're going to go over just kind of generally the background of kind of cannabis and its current state in New York, and then get into some of the findings from our report. The recent IBO report that was released was published in August. It's the first IBO kind of projections and estimates on what revenue the city will see from legal cannabis. We're already seeing some of that, but as we'll discuss, it's not been going as quickly as some people I think were hoping initially. But in 2021, the state passed the MRTA, which is the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. This was the legislation that legalized adult use cannabis in New York State. And that legislation created an office called the Office of Cannabis Management, and a board that oversees that office. Those are the folks who are in charge of creating the regulatory framework for the new legal market. You know, so we had this legalization in 2021. Unfortunately, you know, there were a lot of slowdowns that we can talk about a little bit more here, but the first retail dispensary really didn't open until almost 2 years later, which was pretty much right at the end of 2022. So that's almost 2 years to the date of the passage of the MRTA. And as of this conversation, there's only, you know, 9 or so dispensaries open within New York City. And there are boroughs in which there are 1 or none dispensaries open currently, which is of concern. Unlike other states where the legal market was really stood up by pre-existing medical cannabis industry and also just individuals with access to personal wealth and capital, New York has prioritized social equity in standing up the earliest dispensaries. So this means that most of our, pretty much all of the retail dispensary licenses were awarded to individuals who were most affected by criminalization and prohibition of cannabis, as well as their family members or dependents. The slow rollout of the legal industry has also been paired with this desire to avoid the pitfalls of past criminalization. And while this is a noble aim, we also have seen that this has led to kind of the proliferation of smoke shops across the city. So currently, with current estimates, the sheriff's department has said there's probably about 1,500 to 2,000 smoke shops. And of course, these shops compete directly with legal retail dispensaries and can affect the ability of the city to generate revenue from a legal cannabis market. Finally, cannabis, of course, remains a Schedule I drug, which there's been some discussion of that at the federal level. But that means that it is still considered an illegal substance with no medical or limited legal use. The problem with this is mainly related to banking. So this is where a lot of capital access issues have come into play for those individuals setting up retail dispensaries, right? Because access to banking, access to loans for small businesses is pretty limited in this industry and has made it a lot slower to open dispensaries. All these factors mean the city's legal cannabis revenue is pretty uncertain. So Eric's going to talk a little more about what those revenue projections are. But we definitely took an approach on providing scenarios because, of course, at this time, some of you may also be aware with some of the legal challenges that are ongoing to the state's regulatory framework that have slowed down and threaten to continue to slow down the opening of dispensaries. So I'm going to throw it to Eric to kind of explain and walk you through our estimates and discuss some of the scenarios that we presented in the report.
Thanks, Lena. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Eric Mosher. I'm a lead economist at IBO. So our cannabis research really focused on a few main questions. How large do we expect New York City's legal cannabis market to grow? What will that market of that size mean for city revenue? And how much time do we expect such growth to take? To answer the first question, we looked at the experiences of 5 states that have had at least 5 years of legal cannabis sales. Those are California, Colorado, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Washington. In those states, we saw taxable cannabis sales per capita reach it ranges from state to state, but most of them ended up between $150 to $300 per year per capita. So given the ongoing unknowns around New York's cannabis market rollout, which Elena just spoke about, we took a conservative estimate for the eventual size of New York City's cannabis market, legal cannabis market, estimating between $100 and $150 per capita annually, which would be between $834 million and $1.2 billion in annual sales for New York City. That's legal, taxable sales. So a market of that size would translate to between 33 million and 47 million in annual city revenue. IBO also developed a city revenue forecast estimate for the coming fiscal years based on the statewide cannabis revenue forecast published by the State Division of Budget. Our estimates were mostly in line with OMB's estimates, which they published in the most recent executive budget. Those were also based on the state forecast, which followed a slightly different methodology, which I won't get into the details of on this call since I only have a couple minutes. And we decided to explore how long it may take to reach $950 million in annual sales, which is the market size implied by OMB's revenue forecast for fiscal year 2027. And to do that, we developed 3 scenarios based on the growth we've seen in the city since the first licensed dispensary opened last December. So far, there has been about 1 new licensed dispensary opened per month in New York City, or 12 per year. And sales figures to date suggest that the dispensaries that have opened so far are on track for about $8 million annual sales on average per year. So what we found is that with the current rate of market growth, so if those trends continue, that will be insufficient for sales to reach $950 million by fiscal year 2027, which is what's predicted by the state forecasts. So either more stores need to open per year or dispensaries need higher average annual sales in order to keep up with what has been forecasted. And of course, as Elena said, I'll just say it again, it's important to keep in mind that this analysis and kind of all analysis to date is based on really only a few months of data from the market so far. If it's possible that things will change, either things will speed up or will slow down, and we look forward to continuing to look at this evolving market and what it may mean for city revenue. Thanks very much. We're happy to take any questions. Yes, Derek, please.
I guess for this report and the previous report, two parameters that might be of interest would be distribution. Like I think about the growth of the cannabis market in particular, and it sounds like one of the constraints is the absorption of dispensary places. And I'm wondering if that is structured in such a way that it's not being access is not being given in a fair, equitable, just way. Is there any way that we can account for whom are the dispensaries that are able to produce and who is not in some way?
Do you mean constraints in terms of like actual physical sites that are available for dispensaries?
That's
and
right.
So like competition between businesses. That's the idea.
Yeah, who actually is allowed to actually sell legal cannabis? How those licenses are distributed? Because it sounds to me that's the constraint. The constraint is that there's not enough to reach the projected revenue that we can receive.
Well, yeah. So actually, one thing I didn't mention, or we didn't mention, is that there have been, I forget the exact number, but something like 240 or 250 licenses awarded to New York City-based dispensaries. So the number, if all of those open tomorrow, I think it would be a very different story. But the constraints really come into play when it comes to physical locations like storefront, like where people are allowed, because part of the law says that you have to be not within a certain number of feet of schools, places of worship, and also other licensed dispensaries. So those are things, and then also, which Elena mentioned, that there are lots of issues with access to capital and access to finance that are preventing. And also, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
And I know we got a lot of people that want to get in, so I won't do back and forth. I'll just get to the crux of what I'm trying to get at, which is this is a new industry for which capital matters, but also politics as to who gets licenses and access where. So I would hope that we are particularly interested in ensuring that we're growing wealth generating capacities of demographic groups in the city that traditionally haven't had access, but to whom this war on drugs was particularly harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing
Absolutely.
we also didn't mention is that eventually, like, there is this board at the state level that also awards grants to communities that were like most disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. So we don't have the criteria yet public on, what exactly that board is going to take into their consideration in creating those maps and creating kind of the distributional program that they will create for those grants. But that's another thing that probably in future analysis we might look at is, where is that money going? What areas of the city? What types of programming is being done? Of course, that's all kind of pending the actual revenue levels at the city or at the state level being high enough, because first, the money that's generated at the state goes to paying for the state administrative, offices that run it. And then beyond that point, when revenue exceeds, that will go to, there'll be a portion of that goes to education, and then also this grant program that we're going to definitely keep our eye on as well. Maria?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for this report. Very interesting. I was interested in your comparison with the other 5 states that legalize the cannabis. I have 2 questions. One is, did these states face the same problems or obstacles as we do? If not, why? So what's the difference? And the second, I noticed a decline in many of them, the revenue per capita decline after somewhere around 21. So what do you know, what's the reason behind that? And are we affected by that right now?
Yeah, thanks for those questions. For the first one, in terms of, so other states didn't face some of the same problems. So there is an ongoing unlicensed or illicit cannabis market in each of the other 5 states, and probably all of 50 states, if I had to speculate. So of course, it's hard to measure exactly what proportion of sales are being done via an unlicensed market versus in licensed dispensaries, but estimates for these other states range from something like 30% in, I think Colorado had the lowest that I saw, to some as high as 80 or 90%, which seems far too high, but probably a lot of cannabis sales in California are being done via unlicensed markets. So I think that, in terms of not having 100% of cannabis market being operating in licensed dispensaries, that is a challenge and what that means for tax revenue, that is a challenge that's persistent in the 5 other states as well. In terms of the speed of opening up dispensaries, I don't believe that's something that has been seen as much in other states, and I believe that's because New York State is the first state that has legalized cannabis and made a concerted, written legal effort to focus the first round of licenses on people who are justice involved individuals or organizations that work with those individuals and their families. So that has led to it just meant that it was quicker for other states to award licenses and for shops to open, or at least that's what we've seen so far. In terms of the decline in around 2021, we noticed that too. Even in the state with the longest history of legal cannabis markets, it's under 10 years of data. So it's really, it's difficult to know whether the dip we saw after 2021 is because those states had previous to that been enjoying the fact that they were the only states with legal markets in their kind of like neighborhoods of states, if you will. Maybe they're enjoying some cannabis tourism from neighboring states. It could be that, just has something to do with the overall kind of slight economic slowdown, related to COVID. Or it could be that those states saw rapid growth and then they're going to reach a sort of lower plateau. All of those unknowns are also reasons why we opted for a more conservative estimate when extrapolating from the 5 other states in terms of what it will mean for New York City. So I think it kind of remains to be seen exactly what how the experience of New York City will mirror other states and cities, or will differ from other states and cities.
So I'm going to step in cognizant of time. The meeting is scheduled to end at 9:30. There are 2 other reports on the agenda. Do advisory board members that are on the Zoom have an extra 10-15 minutes, or do you want us to address these reports at a future meeting?
I have time.
Yeah, I have time.
Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it back to Louisa, and we're going to try to be time sensitive.
Okay. With 15 minutes, next up we have a report on the Paycheck Protection Program. And we have joint authorship with Cole and Juliana.
Yes, okay, and so I'm going to get started. Again, I'm Cole Rako, senior economist here at IBO. This is work that Juliana and I have been working on a great deal over the past year, really. We don't have a report to point you to yet, but hopefully very soon we will. But I just wanted to, or we just want to tell you some of the things we have found and the work we've been doing. So as I'm sure you know, most people here, the Paycheck Protection Program is a major federal program created by the CARES Act, and it provides low interest and forgivable loans to small businesses to help try to promote employment retention through the early and worst stages of the pandemic. Between 2 major rounds in 2020 and 2021, over $955 billion was authorized to be spent, of which ultimately about $800 billion was dispersed across the country. And just over 30% of that went to firms and employers here in New York City. which is slightly above the proportion one might expect based on the city's share of national employment. But that's not really unexpected given the disproportionate impact that COVID had on the city, especially in the early days, with a very disproportionate amount of cases and deaths and much greater job loss overall with a much slower recovery. And also one thing that we found that we think is very important is that the majority of initial job losses and subsequent gains in the months following kind of the initial shock all happened amongst, or majority happened amongst the smallest firms in the city with less than 250 employers. Actually, in just less than 50 employers. A lot of that is where that was happening. And it's also where the vast amount of PPP loan dollars ended up. So the reason that we find all of this is important is because there have been some national studies which have attempted to estimate the employment effects and the basically like cost per job of PPP and how much money went to it versus how many jobs were saved. And those national estimates reflect very high costs and suggest that this program was extremely inefficient. New York offers a particular case to study this because the effects of the pandemic were so great and had such a great impact on our smallest businesses. And we wanted to design a study that allowed us to look at it specifically within the context of New York and use our unique data access to maintain all of these small businesses and see what was actually happening there. So I'm going to turn it over to Juliana, who's going to tell you a little bit about how we did that and what we found.
So yes, we took advantage of the fact that IBO gets unique access, well, somewhat unique access to QCW data, which allows us to look at employment levels at the establishment level, so firm location, by month. And like Cole said, $30 billion went to the city in these loans. We found that on average, receipt of a PPP loan was associated with the firm retaining almost 2 more employees in August 2020 than businesses that did not receive a loan. And if we translate that to how many businesses received those loans, that's about 280,000 additional employees. So it is somewhat substantial. And additionally, we find this positive impact on employment lasts through the end of 2022. So both the loans that were provided in 2020 and the loans that were dispersed in 2021 had impacts on employment through the end of last year. So translating all of that into a cost per job saved, we estimate that between $40,000 and $65,000 of federal dollars was spent for each job retained per year. That's substantially lower than other researchers' estimates using national data. And that 40 to 65,000 is close to the Census Bureau's estimate of median salary in New York City, which means that we found the PPP to be relatively efficient in preserving jobs in the city after the early depths of the pandemic. The details of our finding make clear that targeting improved the policy's results, particularly in the case for New York City that was disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So we're open to questions if you have any.
I just had one. I wondered if you could also look at the ERT, the Employee Retention Tax credit now available. Some people benefited from the first round and not the second round of PPP. Others are now benefiting from the ERT. And it just might be interesting to see if there was an, what's the impact of that as well. It's related.
Right, absolutely. And, it is something that we are thinking about. Unfortunately, so we took advantage of the fact that the PPP loan data was made available by the Small Business Association on a, loan by loan basis. ERT is much more complicated because I think we would need the data from IRS because it is applied for and received via tax form. So we're thinking about it and thinking of ways that we can look at that as well. Pakita?
One of the offsided costs of the program is the fraudulent acquisition of the funds. Will you be able to come up with a cost in New York City and compare that to maybe the national amount to sort of demonstrate that that cost per employee, what if there's any portion of that that could be attributed to fraudulent acquisition of the funds?
So that is definitely an interesting question. And, you know, it's one of the reasons that we looked into this, because a lot of the attention that was given to the PPP was on the individuals who applied but weren't necessarily eligible or fraudulent claims. The PPP loan data, they remove loans that have been determined to be fraudulent. So we don't necessarily see that to be able to attribute any of the spend that is due to those fraudulent claims. So unfortunately, we're not able to say very much about
that. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Juliana and Cole, and stay tuned. This will be out shortly, and we'll be sharing it with all of you. Last up, we have an interactive tool that we shared with the public, which illuminates the cost of running New York City. And Brian will be speaking to that.
Thank you. Thank
Brian,
you, Gina.
and
Sorry?
we appreciate your speed speaking.
Yep, I got this. I cut out a couple things. So as I said earlier, I'm the budget review analyst, and along with my manager, Logan Clark, we recently published a tool on running the cost of running the city for a day. This stemmed from a question from Councilmember Justin Brannan about how much it costs to run the city for a day. And we thought a lot about how we could structure this. We could pick an exemplary day throughout the year, but how do you choose the day? There's spending that's not equal across the year. You could take all city spending and divide by 365, but maybe that includes costs that you don't want to include, like administrative costs or other such centralized costs. And then you could also select certain costs to exclude, but then how do you choose which costs? So ultimately, we realized that there are so many different ways to answer this question that creating a tool that allows users to answer it for themselves was the most effective way that we could answer it. So the tool starts with actual spending data from 2022. Users then get to choose which agencies and types of expenditures they want to include or exclude in the cost of a day calculation. And then the tool automatically populates a summary table, it's a pivot table, that shows how much it costs to run the city for a day on average. Our website includes an infographic that is just one example of what the tool can show, and it uses the simplest assumption, which is including all city spending from 2022. And under that methodology, it approximates $300 million a day to run the city. But if you are interested in diving into the tool, it's an Excel-based tool. You enable a very simple macro that allows the pivot table to automatically update itself, and you can actually dive further than just the agency level. You can see the expense category and the object codes, which are more granular descriptions of expenses that are standardized across agencies. So it's really ripe for comparison and diving into the budget. And I'm happy to take any questions on that.
No, I think the tool's cool. I just played around a little bit, so congrats on that. Just to a larger point on all these reports and the work you're all doing is, I know part of what we've been discussing about IBO is getting the information out there more. So whether it's through social media, community boards, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering how high have we gotten the information out to New York City?
Thank you, Wayne, for that question, and thank you for the joke about the title. I think Wayne gives full kudos to the title for the cannabis report. We do press releases. We use the platform now known as X. We engage with other key stakeholders depending on what the topic is. we share the report with lots of people who we think might be interested. And what we find interesting to see is that occasionally there's media attention immediately, but often media or expert attention comes back when the topic is relevant again. So for example, some of our education reports this summer got a lot of attention the week before school began, because we think people were looking at, what is information on, for example, the change in the class size law and the impact as we go into the school year. But we are formulating additional strategies about outreach, and we would very much appreciate your thinking as to how to get more people paying attention and also more people asking us questions. Every report you see here came somehow from a question or a series of questions combined. And we have access to data. We have, as you can see, incredibly talented staff. And we are eager to answer the myriad of questions that New Yorkers wonder about how this city functions. So thank you. And thank you also, Derek, for the feedback in the chat. It's 9:41. Any other questions, or shall we wrap?
I think we should remind people the next advisory board meetings are December 13th and December 13th at 8:30 a.m. And I guess I will make a motion to adjourn. Can I have a motion?
Moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Right.
Awesome. Thanks. Good work, everybody.